You've heard the stories. Whispers of creatures that take the shape of animals, that prowl the night under the guise of something familiar. But those who have crossed paths with a skinwalker know that what lies beneath the surface is far from human. They are the ultimate predators, cunning, relentless, and driven by an ancient hunger. Tonight, you'll hear the tale of one such encounter, based on real events that still haunt the desolate deserts of the American Southwest. These people, they still don't realize, but they've just entered the realm of Mr. Scary Guy. Prepare yourself for a journey beyond the ordinary, into the shadows of your deepest fears. Welcome to the world of Mr. Scary Guy. I grew up on the outskirts of a small town in New Mexico, surrounded by endless stretches of desert and dense patches of forest. My family owned a modest ranch, where I spent most of my childhood exploring the vast and eerie landscapes. The tranquility of the remote area was often interrupted by strange occurrences and unsettling local legends, the most terrifying of which was the legend of the Skinwalkers. It was a cool autumn evening when my encounter with the inexplicable began. I had returned home from college for a brief visit, eager to escape the stress of city life. My younger brother, Jake, had convinced me to take a walk with him into the woods behind our property. Jake had always been fascinated by the supernatural, often regaling me with tales of local folklore, but I dismissed them as mere stories to pass the time. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ground, we ventured deeper into the forest. The air was crisp, and the silence was only broken by the occasional rustling of leaves underfoot. We walked for what seemed like hours, discussing everything from school to our parents, when Jake suddenly stopped in his tracks.
"Did you hear that?"
he whispered, his voice trembling. I listened intently, but heard nothing out of the ordinary. "Hear what?" I asked, trying to sound unconcerned.
"It sounded like someone calling my name,"
Jake replied, his eyes scanning the darkening woods. I shrugged it off, attributing it to his overactive imagination. "Probably just the wind," I said, but a sense of unease began to creep in. We continued walking, but the atmosphere had shifted. The forest seemed to close in around us, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. That's when we saw it. A figure standing just beyond the tree line, barely visible in the fading light. It was tall and gaunt, with long matted hair and eyes that seemed to glow with an unnatural light. Jake and I froze, staring at the figure in disbelief. It moved with an eerie, unnatural grace, stepping closer and revealing more of its grotesque form. It looked almost human, but not quite. Its limbs were elongated, its skin pallid, and stretched tight over its bones.
"Run!"
Jake shouted, breaking the spell of terror that had paralyzed us. We turned and sprinted back the way we came, branches scratching at our faces and arms as we crashed through the underbrush. I could hear the creature behind us, its footsteps heavy and relentless. We burst out of the woods and onto the open field near our house, but the sense of safety was fleeting. Jake stumbled and fell, and I skidded to a stop to help him up. As I reached out, I saw the creature emerge from the trees, its glowing eyes fixed on us. I hauled Jake to his feet, and we bolted towards the house, not daring to look back. We slammed the door shut behind us and locked it, our breaths coming in desperate heaves. The house was dark and silent, offering little comfort against the terror we had just escaped. That night, as we sat in the living room, too afraid to sleep, Jake told me about the Skinwalker legends he had heard from our neighbors and friends. According to Navajo folklore, a Skinwalker was a malevolent witch who could transform into animals and mimic the voices of their victims to lure them away from safety. They were said to be nearly impossible to kill and capable of inflicting unimaginable terror and suffering. The next few days were a blur of fear and paranoia. Every sound, every shadow seemed to hold a threat. We rarely left the house, and when we did, it was only in broad daylight and never alone. The sense of being watched was constant, a chilling reminder of our encounter. One evening, as we sat on the porch, trying to convince ourselves that it was all in our heads, we saw it again. The figure stood at the edge of the woods, watching us. This time, it didn't move, didn't come closer. It simply stood there, a silent reminder that it was still there, waiting. Desperate for answers, we reached out to a local Navajo elder, hoping for some way to protect ourselves. The elder listened to our story with a grave expression, then told us that the only way to combat a skinwalker was through powerful protective rituals and blessings. He performed a cleansing ceremony at our home, chanting in a language I didn't understand, but the words seemed to carry a weight and power that was almost palpable. He placed protective symbols around the house and warned us to stay vigilant. For a while, it seemed to work. The sightings stopped, and the oppressive feeling of being watched began to fade. But the sense of safety was short-lived. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a faint tapping at my window. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the wind, but the tapping grew more insistent. I got up and approached the window cautiously. As I pulled back the curtain, my heart sank. There, standing just outside, was the creature. Its eyes locked onto mine, and it began to mimic my voice, calling out for help in a chilling, distorted tone. I stumbled back, terrified, and grabbed the phone to call Jake. But as I dialed his number, I realized he was already standing in the doorway, his face pale and drawn.
It's here,
he said simply. We gathered in the living room, too afraid to go back to our rooms. The creature continued to tap at the windows, its voice growing more desperate and insistent. It felt like it was trying to break us down, to wear us out, until we couldn't resist any longer. The next morning, we contacted the elder again, begging for his help. He arrived quickly, bringing with him more protective items and performing another, even more intense ritual. He warned us that the Skinwalker was persistent and that we needed to be strong and united to withstand its attacks. Days turned into weeks, and the creature's attempts to terrorize us became more sporadic, but no less frightening. It would appear at odd times, always just on the edge of our vision. One night, as we sat in the living room, exhausted and on edge, we heard a loud crash from the kitchen. We rushed in to find the back door wide open, the wind howling through the gap. The protective symbols the elder had placed were scattered across the floor, and the sense of dread was overwhelming. Jake grabbed a baseball bat, and I armed myself with a kitchen knife. We searched the house, room by room, but found nothing. As we returned to the living room, we saw it, the creature standing in the doorway, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. It stepped into the room, its movements fluid and predatory. Jake swung the bat, but the creature dodged effortlessly, its eyes never leaving us. It lunged at Jake and I screamed, charging forward with the knife. The creature's skin was cold and leathery, and as I stabbed at it, it let out an ear-piercing screech. It recoiled, and for a moment I thought we had won. But then it straightened, its eyes blazing with fury. It seemed to grow larger, more menacing, and I realized with a sinking feeling that we were outmatched. Just as it was about to strike again, the elder burst into the room, chanting loudly. The creature froze, its eyes widening in fear. The elder continued his chant, moving closer, and the creature began to shrink back, its form flickering and distorting. With one final desperate screech, it turned and fled, disappearing into the night. The elder completed his ritual, and the oppressive feeling began to lift. He turned to us, his expression stern.
"This is not over,"
he said.
"The Skinwalker will return. You must remain strong and keep the protective symbols close. Do not let it break you."
We thanked him and promised to heed his advice. The next few days were tense, but the creature did not return. Slowly, we began to rebuild our lives, always wary, always prepared. Years have passed since that terrifying encounter, but the memory is still fresh in my mind. The forest that once felt like a safe haven now feels like a constant threat. We remain vigilant, always on guard, knowing that the Skinwalker could return at any moment. Some nights, when the wind is just right, I can almost hear it. A faint tapping at the window, a distant call in a distorted voice. We survived, but we are forever changed, marked by the knowledge that there are things in this world beyond our understanding, things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I wish I could say that our story ended there, that the terror was behind us, but life has a way of reminding you that some nightmares are never truly over. About a year after our initial encounter, strange things began happening again. It started small. Doors left open that we were sure we had closed, objects moving on their own, the faint smell of something burning in the middle of the night. Jake and I tried to rationalize these occurrences, convincing ourselves that it was just our imagination, the residual paranoia from our encounter with the Skinwalker. But deep down, we knew better. One evening, I was home alone, sitting in the living room and reading a book. The sun had just set, and the house was cloaked in a soft orange glow. I had left the window open to let in the cool evening breeze. As I turned a page, I heard it again, a faint tapping at the window. My body went rigid with fear. I tried to ignore it, but the tapping grew louder and more insistent. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and walked towards the window. As I pulled back the curtain, I saw the creature again, its glowing eyes staring into mine. This time, it looked different. More decayed, almost skeletal, as if it had been rotting away over the past year. It opened its mouth and began to speak, mimicking my voice in a distorted, eerie tone.
"Let me in,"
it said, its voice sending chills down my spine. I stumbled back, horrified,
"Let me in,"
and grabbed the phone to call Jake. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely dial his
"Let
number.
me in."
When he answered, I could hear the fear in his voice as I told him what was happening.
I'm on my way,
He said, and I could hear the urgency in his voice.
"Let me in."
I hung up and backed away from the window, never taking my eyes off the creature.
"Let me in."
It continued to tap on the glass,
"Let me in."
its voice growing more desperate and insistent.
"Let me in."
The minutes felt like hours as I waited for Jake to arrive.
"Let me in."
When he finally burst through the front door, I felt a brief moment of relief. But that relief was short-lived. The creature had disappeared from the window, but we could still feel its presence, a heavy, oppressive weight in the air. We called the elder once again, begging for his help. He arrived quickly, his expression grim. He performed another cleansing ceremony, but this time it felt different. There was a sense of urgency and desperation in his actions, as if he knew that the creature was growing stronger. After the ceremony, the elder sat us down and told us that the Skinwalker was more powerful than he had initially thought. It had marked us, and it would continue to return, growing stronger each time.
You must find a way to break the connection,
He said.
There is an old ritual, but it is dangerous and must be performed exactly as described. If you make a mistake, the consequences could be dire.
Desperate, we agreed to perform the ritual. The elder gave us detailed instructions and warned us that we would need to face our deepest fears and confront the creature head-on. That night, we prepared for the ritual. We gathered the necessary items and followed the elder's instructions to the letter. As midnight approached, we began the ritual, chanting the ancient words and invoking the protective spirits. The air grew cold, and the room was filled with an unnatural darkness. The creature appeared, its form shifting and flickering in the shadows. It lunged at us, but we held our ground, continuing to chant and focus on the protective symbols. The creature screamed in rage, its form distorting and twisting in the darkness. I could feel its anger, its desperation to break free and attack us. But we held strong, pouring all of our energy into the ritual. Finally, with one last deafening screech, the creature was banished. The darkness lifted, and the room was filled with a soft, comforting light. We had done it. We had broken the connection. The elder praised our bravery and told us that we were finally free. The Skinwalker would not return. The sense of relief was overwhelming, and for the first time in years, we felt truly safe. Life slowly returned to normal. The strange occurrences stopped, and the oppressive feeling of being watched faded away. Jake and I resumed our daily routines, but the memory of our encounters with the Skinwalker never left us. We remained vigilant, always on guard, but the terror that had haunted us for so long was finally over. We had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, stronger and more united than ever before. Years passed, and we moved on with our lives. Jake got married and started a family, while I pursued my career and traveled the world. But every so often, when the wind howls through the trees or the night is unusually still, I am reminded of the Skinwalker and the horrors we faced. I know that true evil exists in this world, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But I also know that we have the strength to face it and overcome it, no matter how terrifying it may be. And so, our story continues, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of courage in the face of unimaginable terror. We survived, and we will always be prepared for whatever darkness may come our way. And so, our story comes to a close, but the terror lingers. Remember, not every howl in the desert wind is from a coyote, and those glowing eyes in the darkness might not be from an animal at all. If you ever find yourself alone in the wilds, just be sure you're not being hunted by something far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. This is Mr. Scary Guy saying, good night, and sleep tight, if you dare. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe by clicking the icon above. We've also got a playlist full of scary stories on your left side, and a suggested video you'll love on the right. Choose one, and keep the scares going.